key thing for me is at the top of your CV, have your skills summary. And that's what most recruiters are going to look to straight away.
Okay, Guy, I thought it'd be really interesting to talk today about how software engineers can work effectively with a recruiter. An awful lot of software engineers have no idea about that. As far as they're concerned, recruitment agent or recruiter is somebody you throw your CV at and hope they get you a job. I'm sure there's a more effective way. What would you say it is?
Yeah. Okay. So speaking first of all from the kind of candidate side of things, a lot of it is around kind of, I guess, relationship building. But I guess the context to be aware of with that, in terms of what I see from candidates being frustrated that they're aware that they're meant to be building relationships with recruiters, is that they're kind of not getting as much response as they would like to, and they're trying to do that. And I guess it's just about being kind of empathetic of where a recruiter is at, what their situation is. So, in the current marketplace, when someone's advertising for a role, they're going to have hundreds and hundreds of responses, sometimes even thousands on some jobs. So the kind of process of going through all of them, managing all of those applicants is pretty heavy and extremely time consuming. So it's just being aware of what their situation is and being kind of empathetic on that basis, and so handling it in a specific way. So, reach out if you're applying for a role. I would definitely suggest follow up with a kind of quick message to the recruiter saying, "Hey, just applied for this. Wanted to make sure you received it. Here's 3 bullet points as to why I think I'm a good match for what you're looking for. If you'd like to discuss that further, then let me know some availability for a chat or something along those lines." It's just a really good way of getting your head above the parapet, so you're not just one of those hundreds of applicants. You've signposted your specific relevancy on that front, and you reached out saying that you're kind of happy to chat. That's always a good way of going about it. Yeah, and building out a network. So connect with recruiters, engage with recruiters. Try to kind of be visible to recruiters. So, regularly posting on LinkedIn and that sort of things is always important.
Okay, so let's talk about that in a minute. For that, sending an email and follow up and the 3 bullet points.
Yeah.
How many people typically do that? If you get 100 applicants or 500 applicants to a role, how many of them are actually going to take the time and do that? And how well does it work for making you stand out?
Yeah. So very few, simply put. So in terms of how well it makes you stand out, very well. Particularly if the kind of relevancy that you can point to is like clear, it's spot on, or even if it's not spot on, if it's tangentially, like if there's relevancy there, realistically, someone who is not suitable is not going to do that follow-up step, because why would they do that? If you're going out there and trying to apply to as much as possible, not too concerned about the relevancy, you're not doing that. Whereas if you are relevant, you're doing that, you are going to stick out, and you're much more likely to get some sort of response and engagement.
So when you say very, very few people are doing it, what are we talking about? 1 in 100, 2 in 100, 1 in 25?
I mean, I would say probably, yeah, maybe something like 1 in 25, maybe. I mean, I don't have the figures to hand. I'm kind of making up a little bit off the top of my head, but it's few. It's very few.
So it is really going to be effective and make you stand out.
100%. Yeah.
Cool. Absolutely. You also mentioned being empathetic to the recruiter there. And I think a lot of people forget that there are, and this is your area of expertise, not mine, there are very different types of recruiters. So somebody could be an in-house recruiter employed by the company that you're applying to. They could be a recruitment agent that's external to that. And within the degrees of being an external agent, they could be a small boutique agency, or they could be, dare I say it, a Parliament Hire agency, where there's an agency with hundreds of recruiters chasing after hundreds of jobs and they're just looking at sheer volume. What are your thoughts on how to work with those different agents, and have I missed some subtleties in between that are relevant?
Yeah, I'd say that's a really important point. For example, with internal talent acquisition people, it's worth remembering that, I mean, depending on the nature of the company, if it's a tech company, you would hope that the kind of internal talent acquisition person is going to be, relatively good in terms of their knowledge and understanding of kind of technical language. But you have to be prepared for the fact that if, for example, I don't know, let's say it's a finance organization who is recruiting for a developer, just being aware of the fact that you need to kind of tailor, to some extent, your application needs to be available for all audiences. So it needs to tick a box for an internal person that doesn't understand the tech quite so well. So you've spelt out, you've extrapolated, not making the assumption that someone knows that, you know, .NET and C# are so heavily interrelated. Don't kind of, or that someone working with React, a modern version of React is using TypeScript. They're not necessarily going to know that. You need to just kind of spell out a little bit more, go to that extra step to kind of help facilitate that. And in terms of the kind of empathy tied into that is being aware of the fact that talent acquisition teams, from what I've kind of seen and heard from speaking to them, lots of companies have taken an approach of, well, we get loads of applications now, so we don't need you to be as proactive. So you can let them come into you, but the deluge of people they've got coming into them, that it's an enormous amount of work. They're not being resourced properly a lot of the time, and they're certainly not being given enough bandwidth to do their work a lot of the time. So just being aware of that is definitely helpful, and being a bit patient with it, I guess.
So could I sum that first bit up, Guy, as saying that, to the example of a finance one, the internal recruiter might be familiar with finance, but
Yeah,
might not be a technical recruiter. They
possibly.
could
Yeah,
be, say, used to recruiting front office staff and not used to recruiting software engineers. So you need to be a bit more aware that they might not have that technical background, and you might need to lay out a clear path for them and sell yourself a little bit more of how you fit the role.
100%.
Okay, cool. And I guess in contrast, boutique agency, what's that going to be like? A bit more, far more knowledgeable?
Yeah, so broadly speaking, I now run my own agency, and I've been doing tech recruitment for coming up to 11 years. So I can't read or write code, and I wouldn't pretend that I ever could, but I can hold a good conversation with an engineer and, hold my own, understand on a high level basis the suitability, to a certain extent. But if I look at, for example, I'm fortunate in terms of the fact that because I am beholden to no one, I am my own boss. Um, I can kind of work in a way that suits me, and I'm not worried about what someone else is thinking. Whereas in a lot of boutique agencies, or some of the larger ones as well, wherever there's a market which is more difficult for candidates, it tends to reflect in terms of how difficult it is for a recruiter. So if it's more difficult for candidates, as a lot of candidates are saying it is at this moment in time, that tends to reflect in terms of how it is for recruiters. And so you then have to look at the pressures that they're under. So typically when it's a worse market, the pressure that the recruiters are under from their bosses is to focus really hard on winning new business. So it's, again, just being aware of that, that's often their priority, because they're getting hammered from their boss or whoever saying, you're spending a lot of time talking to candidates. That's great, but we need you to be going on winning more business for all the candidates you've spoken to. And it's finding that balance. So I guess it's just, again, being aware of that being the case, being a little bit patient. But I'll put a big asterisk over all of this, because I don't want to get absolutely roasted by all the engineers who are listening to this and going like, yeah, but I get ghosted all the time. That's never acceptable. You should always as a bare minimum, get some sort of response back saying, you've not been successful, you're not being taken forward. And if you had an interview, I would also say that the bare minimum is actual proper feedback, to say, where you could improve, and you know what didn't go so well, why you're not being taken forward, or why you are being taken forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about that agent, then you said that they're out chasing new business. From the candidate's perspective, when it's a bad market, then as a candidate, it's a bad market for recruiters as well, because they are chasing down the vacancies just like we are. So if there's fewer vacancies for us, there's fewer vacancies for them, and they're spending more time trying to find those vacancies, just like we might be as a candidate. So we're not going to necessarily get the responsiveness we might get in a strong market for candidates where there's fewer of us available and they're trying to chase us down and fill lots and lots of vacancies. So again, it's that kind of inverse of the supply and demand, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 100% what it is. We're in a market where our product is people, and I think it's really important that, from a recruiter's perspective, people need to be treated like people. They need to be treated with respect. They need to be communicated well with, and hence why I say what I say about feedback. But ultimately, when you look at it in those raw terms, um, you know, a recruiter can speak to candidates all day long. If they're not kind of dedicating a sufficient amount of time and balancing that with where the supply and demand is, then that's great. They can have lots of good conversations with candidates, but they're not going to have the opportunities for those candidates in the first place, basically.
I suppose you could say that's just like us as candidates from the candidate side, networking.
Yeah,
If you go and network with a bunch of your peers and have some lovely coffee chats with them, but never reach out and talk to some hiring managers, you're probably not going to find a job.
yeah,
Where
absolutely.
if you start reaching out to hiring managers and start finding the right people and talking to them and doing that, that outreach, you've got a far higher chance of finding a job.
100%.
Okay, cool. So let's say I'm a candidate, I'm out there looking, I've got my CV, resume ready. What are some of the top 3 things I want to make sure I like about that CV resume before I send it to you as a recruiter to give me the best opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. So put yourself in the shoes of a recruiter. You've got, let's say, 800 applicants on the roll to go through, and you've only got a certain amount of time because, again, your manager's hammering you to get on the phone and do some business development to try and win more business. So you've only got a finite amount of time to kind of go through and review CVs. So you need to kind of stand out and be visible as being suitable as immediately as possible. So the key thing for me is at the top of your CV, and please put it at the top, have your skills summary. That's what most recruiters are going to look to straight away. If I'm looking for a full stack TypeScript developer with AWS, then I want to be able to see straight away, great, this person has got experience of working with, Node, React, AWS Lambdas, or whatever else. I want to be able to see that at the top straight away and go, like a blurb of a book, yes, this person looks like they are suitable at a high level basis. Now I want to see, where have they used that skill? How have they used that? What's the context that they've used that skill and how long for? So then you're kind of going down through from there to the jobs. You want to see within the job, the tech stack listed within that ID as well. So you can identify where and how they've used it, and then brief bit of detail of the what you did, but also including details around achievements, and that's something that I think it's really difficult for developers to do often because lots of businesses won't give the full detail of what the kind of commercial impact of what they did was on the business. But um, the key thing is to really kind of try and spell out what the kind of value you added. And you might not be able to make it pounds and pence, but just ask yourself why. Like, what was the reason that we were doing this? Because, whilst you may not have known the full commerciality of the scenario, it's probably unlikely that you were told to go and build something. And when you said, okay, so what's what's the reasoning, what's the need here, that you just went, they went, because we said so. What wouldn't have given
Okay,
some
cool.
context normally.
That's a great point, Guy, and I'd like to really pull that thread a little bit later.
Yeah.
But before we do, can I just come back to something you said there in describing that you want the CV, you want the top saying,
Yeah.
I've worked in React, AWS, etc., and all the buzzwords, and then the tech stack for each role. That's great if you're an individual contributor, you're working through that. What would you advise a manager to do then in a similar position where it's not going to be a list of technical skills?
Yeah, so I guess that does come down more to the size and technical makeup of the people in the team. But really, I would focus in more, again, it's the value added piece. So how much were you kind of doing the technical side of things, if at all? Were you getting involved in the kind of architecture? Was it more from a kind of, the involvement more from a delivery basis, or was it pure people management? Um, you know, Obviously provide that kind of detail and context, but I'd say even the more senior you get, the more the emphasis should really be on that kind of impact and achievements, whether that's here's where we started, here's where we finished, or whether it's here was our need, here's what we did, here was the commercial impact.
Okay, cool. So let's go back then and pull on that thread. As you rightly said, a lot of software engineers struggle with that. They find it very difficult to describe the impact. I think that's something that most software engineers should address, whether or not they're looking for a role. Because, again, as you rightly pointed out, for every single task we get given, there should be a business reason. We are building software to support the organization. The organization has some goals, and it's spending money paying us to build software to help achieve those goals. We can best do that if we understand what is the problem, why are we trying to solve it, and what does a good solution look like. So for every single bit of software we get asked to write, we should be asking those things because it enables us to do the best job possible. Engineering is all about trade-offs. Should we build this? Should we build that? Should we use this technology, this technique? Are we building something that's going to be thrown away? In which case, building a solution quickly to get an answer because the answer is valuable is more important. Are we building something that's a product and we want to be sustainable? In which case, quality is far more important. So I would encourage engineers at every single step of the way to ask, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Why is this problem important? Why is it the most important? What does a good solution look like? If you start asking those things, we start getting an understanding of the impact of our work, and we're better positioned to work out what the right solution is.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you run the risk of a product owner comes and asks you to build me a car, when the problem they're trying to solve is to get 300 people to a festival, taking something we just talked about. In which case, building them a bus might be a far better answer, but if you just take their requirement to build a car, you're going to build a car for 4 people. It's going to have to do 90-odd trips to shift your 300 people, where if you built them a bus that could take 100 passengers, it would do 3 trips. So a bit of a contrived example, but if we ask what's the problem we're trying to solve and what's a good solution look like, we might propose a completely different solution to if we just take a ticket off a product owner says, build me an X. And then we'll have that understanding, we'll have that impact. And something we talked about before when we were planning the session is that it'd be good then to take a note of this. When you get that information, write it down, create a brag document or something that we've got this details. So when you come back to prepare your CV resume, you've got this to refer back to.
100%. And I know some people who will, they just stick it into, they've got like a kind of long version, long form master CV that they then kind of take stuff out of and add stuff into to make it more relevant as they apply to things. But same thing as what you're talking about, that the key thing is to keep a record of what you've done, what the impact was, because you've got that information, you're able to apply for stuff straight away with the most relevant information. And also when it comes to that, you're not going, really do with knowing that information about what the impact was of that. And you're not going back to someone in your business going, what was the impact that we did that? Like, what was the commercial gain we had from that? And then going, why do you want to know that? That's a bit suspicious.
As you said that about having that long form list and picking out the bits that are relevant, kind of thought that might be something that many people these days would argue that AI would be a great answer for. take your long form list of here's everything I ever did, write me a 2-page CV for this job spec. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that would be useful and productive, or do you think
I
AI
don't.
might hinder your application?
I mean, like, as with anything, AI, when used responsibly and sensibly and with a shed load of attention to detail and buckets and buckets and buckets of salt, yeah, great. If you're just going to copy paste it, no, don't do that. Ultimately, we all know it's got the capacity to hallucinate. It's got the capacity to, just make wild mistakes or just lie. So it's just being really careful with it, and then thinking about things like grammatical instances and that sort of things. But also, whilst I think most recruiters really don't mind people using AI, you've also got to consider that a lot of the language becomes quite generic. So your CV can read quite a lot like a lot of other CVs. So I would say a better way of using it is to kind of go, rather than letting it rewrite the whole thing, is to kind of go pick out specific examples that you think I should um, emphasize in relation to what they've given here with these details in the spec and et cetera, et cetera. And then take that and put that into it and do it yourself, because you also think about other things that um, you know AI may not have thought of, that AI may not have the information of. Like, you might want to extrapolate a little further. I think LLMs are great, but they're generally, it's an iterative process. You're bouncing off the things it gives you and kind of tailoring that down, give it back to it, see what it gives back to you.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you. Another thing you mentioned there is personal brand and engaging with people on LinkedIn to get to know the recruiters. How important do you think that activity on LinkedIn and your profile on LinkedIn is for finding a role?
It's difficult because I know that there's lots of people out there who've got a really good presence and they still struggle. There's so many factors, and what I'd say is, you know, with anything in, applying for a job in terms of recruitment, in terms of, recruitment is a form of sales ultimately. There's an awful lot of luck involved, and anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong, frankly, because it's about getting hold of that person at the right time, being in front of that person when they've got a role or whatever. But the key thing is you make your own luck. By which I mean is that the more that you do to enhance your luck, the better your chances are going to be. So being visible on LinkedIn with kind of content, with engagement on posts, etc., that's always going to make you more visible. If you're doing that consistently with recruiters, they're going to recognize you. If you're doing that consistently with hiring managers in companies that you want to work in, you're going to be more visible to them inevitably. So that's really important. And then the other thing I would say is in terms of that side of things, the number of people who neglect their LinkedIn profile in terms of the actual content within the profile itself is astounding. Um, you know, you've effectively got a public facing CV there. Make sure it's as detailed as your CV at the very least. And make sure it's hard coded with the skill set that you've got, so you're more searchable in the way that LinkedIn works from a recruiter's perspective on their back end.
Okay, cool. How important in that are some of LinkedIn's features, like what location you set and how you list your skills? Which elements there really impact the search when you're looking for a candidate?
So again, it all depends on, there's more than one way of kind of using LinkedIn from a recruiter's perspective. But with their kind of AI tools that they keep, that aren't that good in some cases, and that really push some of their functionality to kind of push you to use AI searching as opposed to kind of more traditional Boolean searching to bring people up. Um, it's the hard skills, the kind of coded skills. When you're adding a job onto your career history, it gives you the option to add in skills that you used in that role. That's become more important because you can then search. If I wanted to search by people that have had X number of years with this skill set, then that's how it kind of calculates that, as I understand it. So that's important. Location wise, so from what I've seen, some people will have, I don't know, United Kingdom listed on there rather than Bristol, for example. Um, and that's okay as long as your location, I think the way that it works is you have a display location and then there is a location, you give LinkedIn your full location basically. Just make sure that's correct because whilst, you could look at it in one of two ways, as long as that detail is correct, then you're still going to come up in the search for something that is based in Bristol and, they're going to kind of prioritize someone who's more local a lot of the time. But also at the same time, if you've got UK, then perhaps you're more likely to be in for a shout for a role that is further afield and less frequently in the office because they're going to think that you're going to be more happy to do those trips to the office when you do it. So there's no right answer really with regard to that. But the key thing is to just make sure that, it's correct at least.
Thank you very much, Guy. That's the end of part 1 with Guy. Join us in part 2, where we'll discuss how hiring managers can work effectively with recruiters like Guy.